Hey, everybody. Welcome to the final edition for 2020 of the 6.5 podcast. I am your co-host, Daniel Newman, principal analyst and founding partner at Futurum Research, joined by my absolutely famous co-host, back from Aspen, just fresh off of a long segment on CNBC, working all the way to the bone, to the last minute, the one, the only, the Patrick Moorhead of More Insights and Strategy. Patrick, welcome to the end, December 31st, 2020.
Daniel, oh my gosh, how did that get on there? No, it is good. I did do CNBC, little intel, third point action, but it was good. Daniel, I'm so glad to be back. I was skiing a little bit in Colorado, but I am back in Austin in the studio, ready to do an end of the year wrap. And we're going to do a little bit of a different approach this time, aren't we? Maybe not as structured. We're going to riff a little. So, it might be, the 10-5, it might be the 10-2. I don't know. We don't know.
You know what? You and I sat down, we said, let's do a final episode, but we've both been working our entrepreneurial fingers to the bone, end of year, trying to just get our companies settled. And that, of course, we've been paying attention to the biggest headlines. We've had acquisitions from, IBM. We've had big news with Intel and Third Point, which is what you were on, CNBC. SAP announced it was going to be doing a Qualtrics IPO, which had kind of been in the works, but that got a memorialized, you could say, this week. But, rather than our normal show, we just sat down and said, you know what? We love our community. We love our guests. There's a lot going on. And we don't oftentimes get a chance to talk kind of about what the themes were, a little bit of a year in review, because our show is so structured, because we are always kind of providing that analysis on the news for the industry. But our industry, being tech, has had some major themes this year. 2020 was crazy. So why not do
obviously, we have to start with the big C, the big C word, COVID-19 and everything that it brought to the table. And while that has dominated a lot of the discussion, it's really going to be providing some kind of everlasting impacts. And if nothing else, I think, Daniel, everything as a service was probably the biggest thing that came up. And whether that's, as consumers, right, we got attached to things like Uber, but even with COVID, things like Instacart, right, getting our groceries as a service was huge. So pretty much everything you could get as a service, and companies leaned on IT for as a service as well, which I think really dominated the headlines.
Yeah, and let's take a step back, right? So in January, it was like life was normal and our industry was normal. You and I, as compadres and co-hosts and working together in this space, we're comparing schedules. I had 48 booked weeks of travel before the year even started. It was going to be perhaps our busiest year. So the industry was already on a trajectory. We started hearing these inklings in January about this virus.
Right.
And most of us kind of followed the news cycle and we're like, oh, it sounds like it's going to be contained. It doesn't seem like it's going to be too transmissible. And I can legitimately remember the moment, Pat, right around about a week before Mobile World Congress, because that was the big event everyone was wondering about. There were some cancellations that were kind of stirring through, some smaller events. You started to hear about some borders being closed down. But at that time, it wasn't actually events being canceled. It was individual companies, remember, that were proactively starting to make announcements. We started to hear Microsofts and Intels, and these companies were pulling out of mobile world. And it was like when that curtain came down, that was the first moment in 2020 when I realized this year is going to be so different. And so with the exception of a few trips for our summit where I came down and visited, and you took a few very safe and careful vacations. I moved my daughter to college. I went from, and you did too, from 48 weeks of thinking we were going to be on the road to legitimately only a few weeks of very, very specialized travel with very limited contact. And mostly the year became about masks, about Zoom, about remote advice, remote events, about an evolution of remote events, which we kind of could talk about. And yeah, everything, Pat, to your point, going from in person, face to face, to as a service. And it by the way, it was really a tough time for the world, but for the tech industry, this year has been surprisingly opportunistic, and not in a negative way. You sometimes would associate that word with being negative, Pat, but it was really the tech industry kind of came to the rescue. And it could have been everything from helping with vaccines to helping with building technologies to keep kids learning and keep businesses going.
Yeah, totally. And collaboration was a big part of that. Hey, we're keeping this kind of wild and woolly. What was the last business trip that you took, Daniel?
Yeah, so I took a trip. I actually remember I went to Spain for a few meetings because I'd already booked it non-refundable, and I had a few other clients and personnel. And I actually caught a Barcelona game right at the end of February. But my last business trip was 1 week after that. I went to Greenville, South Carolina. That's where Olivier Blanchard, one of our analysts, lives. And then we met with one of our analyst relations person, decided to do a remote meeting. I remember at the time we were all kind of like, do we go, do we not? We met in a restaurant when we got there, had dinner, went out to eat several times, went out for a few drinks. And it was legitimately something weird about when I flew home. It was only like a one evening trip. When I flew home, you could almost feel the world changing right beneath your feet.
Yeah.
This was before masks were required, but it was only days. And I think it was less than 10 days after that, my kids that were pulled out of school. And by the way, still have not returned.
That's crazy. That's crazy. My last trip, it was crazy. The week of the 11th or the week of the 10th, right around my birthday, I went out with a bang, Daniel. On Monday, I flew to San Francisco to go to Samsung Galaxy Unpacked, got on a plane that night and went and visited T-Mobile and Microsoft. And then got on another red eye, came back and went to visited Google on Thursday. And then I went home, finally made it home on Thursday night, which was crazy. And I had worked myself, I think, so hard. You probably remember this, but I had an issue with my eye. So it was almost like COVID and my eye issue. Where I had double vision. It was like, Pat, slow down, dude. You're going crazy. But that's just a long way to get to collaboration, right? Which has gotten better. And it looks like companies like Microsoft, Cisco, Zoom, Google have pulled their roadmaps in on the services front, by years. It's been pretty crazy.
It was. And by the way, I remember the eye for like weeks.
I had a patch. I had to wear a patch for about 2 weeks. I looked like a freaking pirate.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a good look for you. I'm not going to lie. Maybe bringing it back as sort of a classic look, like when we did the mustache show not that long ago. Remember that?
Yeah.
So that was pretty fun. We had a December. We didn't do Movember. We did a December mustache show. But I think I was at that Unpacked with you. And you jettisoned off from there. And yeah, there was a few more weeks for me. I braved it. I just, again, the information wasn't really there, but yeah, you hit you hit so many things on the head. But I think what really came out of that, Pat, was, we did see a super acceleration. We saw in this year, Microsoft Teams went from 11 million or so daily users to 115 million.
Yeah.
Zoom's market valuation, shot up there where it was more valuable than the world's largest automotive companies, in just a matter of weeks and months. And Zoom went through a certain phase of becoming all the rage and then becoming everybody's problem when you had the Zoom bombings.
Yes.
And you remember having the China security issues. And that company really did come a long way, Pat, throughout the year. But WebEx, Microsoft, Zoom, 8x8, Google, like you said, they all really pushed their software businesses forward. And I think we're big winners because of it. And Amazon and AWS is another one that did that, and quietly is providing a lot of the back-end software for contact centers and communication. But the theme too of collaboration too, Pat, was digitalization. So it was collaboration and digitalization. Was every business that could go digital had to. Every company, if you were a restaurant, could you go digital?
Right.
If you were a retailer, could you go digital? If you were an events company, could you go digital? If you were a performing arts company, and by the way, Pat, another thing that kind of happened quietly was we lost sports for a while. And I know that seems like a sidebar, but when you go from a world with sports to a world without sports, gosh, the March to June time when you had no sports, no baseball, no football, no basketball, no soccer, what a crazy sort of dystopian life it was for a period of time. But in the background, the tech industry was fueling AI, machine learning, communications, to connect businesses, to drive forward the cure for vaccines. I mean, it was like a really kind of this crazy world, Pat. But by the way, I would guess, I don't know what your guess would be, but mine would be, I had 10 times more meetings this year than a year before.
Yeah, it was crazy. My advisory went off the charts, and I used this calendaring tool, and I had 3 times more advisory sessions during COVID than I did with non-COVID. Now I don't track, I didn't track my face-to-face ones with that same tool, but yeah, it was off the charts. And Daniel, it even got us to experiment a little bit as well. I remember talking to you on a Florida beach about this crazy idea of doing the 6-5 podcasts where we had a bunch of different CEOs, which then led, of course, to the 6-5 summit, which interesting. I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Hang on a second. Little technical difficulty.
Yeah, well, while you're doing that, I mean, if you recall, Pat, what really happened was we started off doing a blitz because we thought our technology partners were doing so many interesting things. We wanted to use our platform to start telling the market about all the cool things. And I think we did 10 podcasts in one day.
We did. We did a podcast blitz.
CEOs, CXOs. It was awesome. And then after we got done with that, we're like, you know what? That wasn't big enough. We need to be bigger and flashing it up here, buddy.
Yeah. So yeah, pretty happy. I mean, we did, I think we had 34 different speakers, headliners, Michael Dell, Lisa Sue, and Doug Merritt. So I was pretty happy with that. And we definitely have to up our game this year. But again, aside from, doing a quick advertisement there, my main point was that we had to flex as well. We had to flex what we did and how we did it, and also to serve our customers. One of our first guests that we had in the Blitz. Let me actually step back. One of the other themes that I'm going to get back on track here, otherwise I'll rabbit hole forever, is that the PC is strategic. There was so much talk. The PC is dead. In fact, MIT ran something, I think it was in 2011, said the PC is dead. I like to go and troll that. I actually use their graphics when I'm doing big roll-ups of how the PC industry is doing. And that's not to say that the PC industry couldn't be healthier, because the margins are pretty low on hardware. But with PCs going up upwards of 20% this year, I think what it did is it proved that the PC is essential. And I've hijacked that from what HP Inc. Talks about, but clearly the PC with that growth is essential. One of the interesting things that happened is it also gave enterprises the ability to test out more Chromebooks as well. And that was kind of a fascinating thing, in that they couldn't get enough PCs, so they would pretty much buy anything that they could. And some of those buy anythings that you could were Chromebooks. Some of them were used PCs with a Chrome browser to essentially run. All they would do is run something in a Chrome browser.
Yeah, it was a fascinating year. The data from Canalys and such came in. Overwhelmingly, the PC's demise has been overstated. This year provided an absolute, it wasn't just a springboard, it was an exponential, launching pad for the PC to get back to growth. Alex Cho, from the president of HP, on our show, and he came on both in our show and in our summit and talked about this very theme. But think about your year. Think about any part of business, whether it was education, whether it was running a company, an organization, keeping connected to family. You know, the mobile device gets a lot of credit, but when it went beyond some very, very, simple tasks, how much more value did we get from having larger format devices? And it's not tablets, it's not phablets. I mean, those things are cool, foldables. We've talked about them, and iPads, but it's been powered by our PCs and at home. I mean, look, I've got desktops, I've got appliance devices. You know, go back to collaboration, that WebEx device that we have, the Pro. We found a new love for our appliances and our devices that are more powerful and more connected. So, and by the way, the numbers were there. I mean, and this probably can lead us right into one of our other themes though, Pat, but like the PC grew, the demand grew. You couldn't get one. You literally couldn't get one. And if you wanted one, like you said, you were settling. You were taking whatever you could.
That's right. Consumer, going to Best Buy and buying a consumer solution to fulfill your enterprise needs.
Yeah, I mean, you had CIOs marching into Costco's trying to get whatever PCs were sold in bulk, because that was how much demand it was required to get people working from home and get people connected. And this also put a huge growth strain and created, and Pat, I think it'd be fun kind of to talk about chips and SaaS to kind of end our show, to kind of end our wrap up before we kind of go back to the end of thinking. But let's talk about chips for a minute. So the chip industry. One of the predictions I had, I wrote a market watch piece earlier in the year, and I said, a lot of people say software will eat the world. Well, and this was kind of, I'll give you partial credit for this one, but we kind of emerged to call it silicon will eat the world, because nothing runs without silicon, and nothing runs without these chips that are being built. And boy, what a year for the chip industry. So obviously to fulfill this PC demand, but then, let's swing it over, and I'll let you start this one, but even just the cloud, right? To grow the cloud, that doesn't happen with just servers. Servers need chips, and on and on and on. So talk about a big year for silicon, Pat.
Yeah. So first thing is we had mergers and acquisitions. We had M&A action going on, and I think really driven by three things. So first thing is Moore's Law, and you'd be like, wait a second, has Moore's Law slowed down? Yes, it has, but silicon still is getting smaller, and when silicon gets smaller, it makes more sense to put more functions on the same piece of silicon. And the second thing is solutions orientation. You have people who aren't just looking for a CPU; they're looking for a CPU, a GPU, an FPGA, and a stack of software to go along there. And I think that is a lot of what's driving AMD and Xilinx and NVIDIA and ARM acquisitions. And then you have this notion of specialization, which is getting easier with the ARM ecosystem, which is that a company like Apple, like an Amazon, AWS, can create their own chips by leveraging certain parts of the architecture, like an ARM CPU, and then optimizing it, putting specialty functions, their own specific intellectual property on it, and then going to TSMC or Samsung and having them fab it up. And finally, with Intel, I know they're deservedly taking some hits on their execution, primarily of 10 nanometer. But what many of us failed to recognize, well, you and I did, of course, was that they brought out their first discrete level graphics chip. And they also got an instance win with AWS on machine learning training with Habana. And I'll give you a little oxygen in the room, but I'm not done yet.
I'm sucking that oxygen right up, because you covered a lot of ground there. But
2 minutes.
We saw momentum. What's that?
Only 2 minutes. I only took 2 minutes.
No, you were great. And there was so much there to unpack. I mean, you didn't even mention AMD, and I know I'm probably the harshest on the AMD, and you're probably a little bit more positive on a day in and day out. But AMD had a really strong year, grew market share in key areas, and continued to win friends and influence people in the OEM space, and of course has built an extremely loyal following in a few of its discrete graphics practices, gaming, and of course, in notebooks with its 7 nanometer launches. Pat, I'd probably be remiss to not mention Marvell and its big acquisition of Inphi, which happened at the end of the year. Kind of got, was quiet because of the fact you had NVIDIA and you had Xilinx all happen, but Marvell's quietly become quite the little player in its respective space, and that warrants some consideration. Cisco is powering the internet with silicon. With its Silicon One chip. That really took off this year. It was a late announcements at the end of last year, but this year was really the year that started to happen. And by the way, Pat, networking was a huge thing. Remember, the Mellanox deal closed with NVIDIA this year, because I know ARM-Video is the big thing, but the Mellanox deal was this year. And to make all this stuff work, the networking, the fabric that connects all this silicon. And the last thing then, just to steal maybe all in the last bit, was Jensen Huang and the DPU, the chiplets, the AWS Nitros. We are seeing this disaggregation thing go in a big way, and it's going to be really impactful to users, not just people interested in silicon, but to everybody that's using cloud and everyone that's deploying these new IT architectures. What is going on here is revolutionary, and it's really exciting stuff, Pat. And I'm sure it's going to be stuff that we're going to be covering a heck of a lot in the next year.
Yeah, one adder on here is Qualcomm, and I think Qualcomm, this was the year for them to productize, get credit for 5G. Okay, and then on top of that, the unveiling of their growth areas, whether it be RF, and they are officially the largest mobile RF provider in the world, beating out people like a Broadcom. As an example,
easy
$8+ billion backlog in automotive, and an IoT business already driving more revenue than pretty much all IoT businesses out there. so a big one out there, and we'll come right back around to Daniel. And then,
that's a good one though. And by the way, how did it even take us that long to get there? It was sort of this perfect caveat though to silicon to 5G. Look,
you were getting to the network part.
I know. As I said, we went silicon to network, and you spun it up perfectly to 5G. The fact that it took us that long in the chip discussion to even get there, but we started with the PC. Now we're back to the mobile device, but we're actually really just talking about the entire way the world connects, which is what Qualcomm is so focused on. And it's going to be a really big year. Qualcomm also had a really big year in court, and it had some serious wins. It had a big battle with Apple that it came out on top, had a big year with the FTC. Its business model was protected. Of course, we have seen Apple and its new chips built on ARM architecture change the roadmap a little bit. That's going to have a potential impact on Qualcomm, a potential impact on Intel, a potential impact on AMD. I don't even want to dig into that too much. But one thing I do want to say, Pat, that you're absolutely right. 5G is super real. This year, look, I've been saying 5G in 18 and in 19, but in 20, 5G became a thing. It is a real thing that just about anybody that's in a larger metropolitan, and thanks to like the likes of like T-Mobile with mid-band, basically any urban area, and even in some rural areas now, you're getting 5G at some case, in some capacity. That happened this year. You can go into the store, and even Apple finally came out with a 5G device, but Samsung had been rocking forward with those devices. Xiaomi, Huawei, the 5G era is here. And I think that's something that really happened this year, kind of quietly. We only heard about the conspiracies on Twitter from all the loonies, but what we actually had happen this year was 5G was deployed at scale, and it was deployed at scale for the consumer on our devices, but it's also going to be deployed at scale for more secure enterprise connectivity, which swings us back to all the big silicon companies like the Intels and Marvells. They're all playing in that space as well. And we're seeing a lot of connectivity, by the way, going back to the Azure clouds and AWS clouds, which you got to say, Pat, that was another thing that saw major kind of consolidation and acceptance was in the cloud.
Yeah, and before we let me just close out the semiconductor section. 3 companies, smaller companies that I've got my eye on are Lattice, On Semiconductor, and Synaptics. It's hard to call On Semi small. It's a top 10 semiconductor, but you just don't hear about them a lot. On Semi got a new CEO that was appointed. Gosh, he's younger than us, dude. Well, yeah, I think he's your age. I got the chance to meet with him. Synaptics is in the middle of a turnaround, and Lattice is I would say in the middle, 3/4 away through their turnaround, and those are three companies that I'm going to have my eyes on in the future. Wouldn't be surprised if somebody tries to make a play for Lattice out there. FPGA, lowest power FPGAs, and the two high power, high performance FPGA folks are spoken for by AMD and Xilinx.
Well, and Jim Anderson's doing a great job over there leading Lattice. I expect good things for that company. Every time I meet with them, I find some serious, some moxie. I think it's going places. You just get that feeling sometimes from a company. Yeah. So what I was sort of teasing there, though, Pat, is I think this year, like for the last couple of years, we talked about Azure, AWS. You saw me throw them out. IBM, Oracle, Google, all playing in public cloud. But it seemed like overwhelmingly by the second half of this year, we were talking hybrid cloud.
That's right.
The OEMs are all launching, Dell Tech and VMware. You've got Cisco going down that road, big moves with HPE and GreenLake. But you also have IBM, Red Hat acquisition finally starting to really materialize and make sense. Oracle's cloud at customer and a number of things that Oracle's doing. By the way, Oracle had some big wins, winning pieces of business from the likes of Zoom and 8x8, Donald's and others. Google keeps chugging along, doing some really interesting work. So, I kind of hit them all, and I'm going to leave the two biggies for you. But I mean, this was a really big year for people starting to kind of say, not all the work's going to the public cloud, but it's not all going to be on-prem either. We heard the container revolution, Kubernetes, all these things are happening because what companies are really realizing is it takes a village. And that village is on-prem, that village is private cloud, that village is public cloud. And of course, the big cloud players are making big moves here too. Yeah,
this year, it's funny, when Andy Jassy stepped on stage last year is kind of when I thought that hybrid was real. But I liked your comment on people really filling in the gaps on that. And AWS Outposts, I mean, it's everywhere. You can get it 1U, 2U, rack. You can get wavelength if you want it in a carrier. You can not even have an outposts, and AWS will have a little mini data center in, let's say, Los Angeles vicinity where you can get this. And hats off to I guess Microsoft, who really started this with Azure Stack. And then I thought Google really made it kind of real with Anthos, right? In saying this is our strategy. So I think it's game on, right? You have the classic on-prem folks moving toward the cloud, and you have the cloud folks moving toward the middle, all aiming for that hybrid area. I mean, now pretty much everybody has a way to manage containers on anybody's infrastructure as well. And I'm trying to think through, how do people differentiate themselves when it all kind of looks the same? And I thought we saw some really interesting stuff from Oracle and IBM and HPE on going vertical. These are areas where I think those companies can do really well. First off, and I'll cite Andy Jassy again, over 90% of the money is still on-prem, right? And what that means is the data's on-prem, and HPE, for instance, going deep with high-performance computing. A good example there. IBM's financial cloud, where they're going vertical. Oracle had a carrier cloud, and those are obviously places where those three vendors I just cited were very strong. And it's an element where subject matter expertise matters as opposed to going kind of a horizontal IaaS.
Yeah, I love that you point that out too. I think the verticalization of almost every partition of tech, whether that's, AI, ML for sales and marketing versus conversation recommenders versus, our friend, at C3 AI built an entire platform, went public, by the way, tripled in valuation along the idea of being able to deploy rapidly right on top of CRM, a vertical stack for AI. But I'm saying we're seeing that kind of hit across every single wave, and the cloud providers are really figuring out like, hey, if we can, like IBM with the fintechs, we did the Bank of America deal, or you had the Splunk and HPE partnership for Wells Fargo get announced, like just these different types of deals that were very verticalized and saying, if we can do it for this giant bank, we can do it for that giant bank, or if we can do it for this big retailer, we can do it for that big retailer. So we saw a lot of verticalization, and we saw, companies really figuring out how to lean into differentiation, because that is going to be hard. But by the way, Pat, one more thing before we kind of, I'd like to talk a little about cloud and SaaS to end up here. But one more thing on this particular topic is the industry is going to grow as a whole. By the way, everything is. This can be chips. This can be software. And the thing is, I think sometimes people can't get their mind around the fact that these numbers aren't finite. So Andy Jassy pointed out 90% is still on-prem, but they're doing $10 billion a quarter. You have a huge growth in the cloud, and there's going to be a huge shift. And what I'm saying is, it's not going to be a winner takes all. Okay, look, Amazon and AWS will continue to grow double digits for the foreseeable future. So will Azure. So will Google. Likely, so will IBM, and so will Oracle. And the point is that's because the whole cloud is growing. Same thing with chips. AWS is getting into chips, and Microsoft will get into chips, and Apple will get into chips. Intel can still grow. AMD can still grow. And I think people really need to put their head around the fact that the tech industry is getting bigger, and the need is going to get bigger, and the market opportunity is going to keep getting bigger. Pat, I know you're probably jonesing to say something, but it just bothers me when I keep hearing the kind of winner takes all thing. All these companies can stand out on differentiation. The OEMs too, Dell's, HPE, Cisco's, all of them can grow if they execute.
Yeah, well, and here's what's happening. IT budgets aren't getting bigger, but here's what's happening is segments of the economy are becoming more governed by technology. So for instance, Tesla never existed. They came out of thin air in technology. Transportation. AWS is replacing FedEx and UPS and even short haul vendors by vertically integrating. So what you have is, in agreeing with your macro point, is that everybody can grow and everything is growing because tech is starting to take over certain elements of other industries. I mean, look at groceries, right? And how Amazon has gotten into that. Look at Instacart and how it's gotten into that. Look at the before COVID hit, the amount of budget that let's say an Uber provided and the services that they provided to it. So economies aren't necessarily getting bigger, but tech is a larger portion of that. And you can look at just the S&P 500 and the Dow Industrials, and as a percentage of tech as GDP and the valuation in the stock market.
Yeah. So let's make our last topic, because in the theme of our 6-5, we always go at least 6 longer, maybe 5 longer, sometimes longer. But chips and SaaS, 2 things we're super passionate about here. And it wasn't a quiet year. We did talk about SaaS through the lens of collaboration, but let's talk about it through the lens of CRM and ERP and some big moves. And I'll start off with one. I mean, Salesforce kind of shocked the world to end the year. So right at the end of this year, Slackforce was united, massive 27 billion.
Yeah, that's right.
Acquisition of the company, and Salesforce putting its name in ink, saying we want to play in collab, we're going to play in productivity, and starting to look a lot more like it wants to have a product offering to line up right there with the Microsofts, the Googles of the world. So we've seen SaaS explode, Pat. And one other thing I want to point out is in the cloud is kind of that headless piece is the CDP has gone massive. So the customer data platform. So analytics is really driving the whole SaaS experience. That can be for your ERPs. That can be for your customer experience management. That can be for your HCM, your human capital management tools. And of course, we're starting to see this migration and integration of extra data and intra data, so that you can basically run a SaaS stack that can look at data across your unstructured across the web, and it can connect to all the structured data in your backend systems, and it can do instant analytics. And the analytics field, by the way, is getting massive. So cloud, SaaS, analytics, and this spins back, Pat. And I know it's kind of like the rabbit hole you go down, but now what's happening is just like the cloud went hybrid, we're starting to see SaaS go hybrid. So you're starting to see, well, you want Salesforce to run really well in your organization? It's going to go hybrid. That's why the company acquired Tableau earlier in the year. By the way, total hybrid play. You want to run Microsoft Dynamics CRM in the cloud? That's great. You want it to run best? You're going to put data in Azure, and you're going to turn it into a hybrid stack, and it's going to run on Azure Stack, and it's going to collectively pull data from your SAP ERP system or your HANA databases or your Cloudera data warehouses or Snowflake or whatever you're using. So we're seeing this rapid growth of SaaS. We're seeing some consolidation, but concurrently, the hybrid theme, Pat, isn't just hybrid for infrastructure, it's hybrid for software.
That's right. And I think that gives the hybrid players like a Microsoft and even like an Oracle an advantage. If we truly believe that, it's going to take years. And I think Salesforce will get to this. It's going to take them a while to do that. I'm still wildly skeptical about Slackforce, but I will, I'll be watching everything that Salesforce does with it with eyes wide open. And I never say never. I'm just going to say it's not probable. I mean, the challenge of going up against a Microsoft and Google is immense. If there's one company who can give the best run at it, I do think it's Salesforce. One of the bigger themes that I saw in terms of SaaS was I would call it the popularization and realization that connecting the front end of the enterprise to the back end of the enterprise is a really good idea. So for instance, connecting your customer to your factory, or connecting your customer to logistics and doing it in real time. And, today it's done through APIs or ETLing data out into a data lake. But this whole notion of doing it real time and having it in the same place, I think has merit. You have to have a good back end and a good front end to make that matter. And I think this is where enterprise SaaS is going. If you do not have this capability, it is going to be a difficult spot to be in. I think that Microsoft and Oracle are doing a really good job at getting that message across, not because it gives them a competitive advantage, but it's because it's true. Obviously, Zoho, with them literally having one platform, could give them an advantage as well. But I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it as much.
Super smart in the SMB space. Zoho is one to watch in that space in particular. That's really where the company wants to play, and why you don't necessarily hear. Also not public, so that tends to quiet the crowds. Pat, one last kind of prediction I'll make on clouds and SaaS, and then maybe we can wrap it up with a little personal anecdote here at the end. But is Amazon and AWS is going to continually get more and more involved in software. We saw it with Connect. We saw it with a number of software layers for everything, on an infrastructure side. We also saw it with analytics and BI tools. The company's just quietly building a bit more of a game there. And when you listen to Andy talk, you just got to kind of say to yourself, why not? I think they're going to be there. And so, and if they're there, they're going to be competitive, no doubt about it.
It's funny. I've agonized in trying to figure out what makes their moves. And I'm convinced that if you are a SaaS company and you sign up for AWS SaaS, PaaS or IaaS, they won't get into it. If they don't have enough customers that are signing up in SaaS, let's say something like a contact center, then they're going to go do it themselves, right? That to me is the magic. I have decrypted. It's all about money. Okay. If they can't get enough IaaS and PaaS customers, they're going to roll up a SaaS service.
But I mean, that's the stack, and that's really what it was designed to do. So let's end it with a little fun. First of all,
we want to talk a little bit about Silicon Valley here.
Yeah. So that's kind of teases me straight into the fun. So we've had this great migration that's going to start to end the year. if it really started off with sort of a borderline tech company, because some people consider them an automotive company, some people consider them a tech company, which, by the way, this migration has quietly been happening, but only in this year have we really started paying attention. But the Silicon Valley is going to soon become the Silicon Hills or Silicon Prairie. Elon Musk, first to come out and say, we're moving to Techsys. Yep, that's my word, Techsys.
Daniel, I give you all credit. I might steal it and never cite you, but Techsys.
Techsys. Welcome to Texas. I think I'm going to trademark it. And then, in the months that followed, we've seen CEOs quietly moving. I know Doug Merritt, the CEO of Splunk, he moved out to Austin. I know several other, the Palantir CEO, sorry, name's escaping me, is out there in the Silicon Hills. And then we seeing big companies. Larry Ellison came out in just the weeks past. Oracle moving out that way. And HPE not moving to Austin, but moving its back to compact roots in Texas. And it's really stirred up a big debate, Pat, and we've shot articles back and forth. But what is the future look like for San Jose and the Silicon Valley?
Yeah, so I, for the foreseeable future, believe that Silicon Valley will still be the epicenter, but I think we have a much more distributed future. Okay, and I can't give you exact percentages of that, but when you have enough people moving around, disaggregating into whether it's New York to Miami or Silicon Valley to Texas, you're going to have some, it's going to leave a mark. I mean, enough companies have left, and there's enough infrastructure being built in Austin and Miami to be able to take it. And whether it's taxes, cost of living challenges, social issues, defunding this, defunding that, that let's say maybe going on in New York and Silicon Valley, I think this is for real. But I don't think that Silicon Valley is over. I just think that their power and influence will be diminished in the future.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I think in the end, businesses are about returning to their shareholders. And when you have a better environment, that's why Delaware has so many corporations established, because of certain laws. But you also, when you talk about the price of talent, you talk about the opportunity for upward mobility. People don't want to go earn $250,000 in a high-end tech role and live in a one-bedroom shanty and have a 45 or 2-hour commute to work.
Right.
There's opportunities for a better quality of life in other places. And California's got some great terrain, beautiful state, no knock, but on any of that. But in the end, these businesses are responsible to their shareholders. First thing I learned when I went to grad school was the number one job of a manager is to return value to its shareholders. And that's a lot of what's going on here. Is you've got companies looking for more friendly places to domicile their businesses, and that's what's happening. And speaking of what happening, is there may be a move amongst the two of us in the coming year. I've threatened it for a long time, but let me just tease this idea, because we'll probably have to do a whole show. But I may or may not have confirmed that Daniel is moving to Austin, Texas, along with bringing all my troops down there, and we're going to plant roots in Texas and be in the center of the next big tech revolution.
Huh. I think I heard a rumor about something like that too, but I could not confirm.
Yeah, we can't confirm it or deny it, but let me just say, if I was picking a spot that I was going to relocate, and I am, and I would probably pick the next big tech hub, which is Austin, Texas. Techsys, Techsys. I love that. I don't know why it's just so
Techsys. Get it? Techsys, everybody.
Yeah. So, I'll end on this. I'm going to make one big prediction about 2021. I'm not even going to be that specific, because I'm going to make it harder for you than for me. But that there is no way, under any circumstance, that 2021 can be worse than 2020 for society. I think we are going to have a better year. I am excited to relocate. I'm excited about the continued growth of the industry. I think a lot of the trends that we sort of treaded on here, Pat, are going to continue into the future. And I think our show, by the way, that's one more commitment to all of you, is going to see an up-leveling this year. We're going to see an up-leveling in production. We're going to see an up-level in the quality. And we're going to see an up-leveling in the guests that we have. I'm confident, Pat, that the 6.5 is going to be the preeminent podcast in the industry for people that love technology.
Well, that's a good thing, Daniel. By the way, I read an article yesterday that 2020 is not the worst year in history. It's only the eighth worst year in modern history, and it had a lot to compete with, like the Civil War, the Black Plague, 9/11, stuff like that. So, well, it's important to. I think it's important for everybody to really look at history, and I love history. I get less stressed about the future and less stressed about the present when I understand what's actually going on. It's amazing the conversations I have with some of my kids, trying to, say, hey, this happened before. No. The House of Representatives did get bombed in the 60s and 70s. It really did. It's okay. There have been a lot of unfortunate things that have happened, but this is not the first time. It really is just a stress reliever. Not that they are terrible things, but we've gotten through these things, and we're going to get through this.
You said something that probably maybe is the smartest thing we've said all year on this podcast, and I believe you've said some pretty smart things, Pat. But is about consuming good, useful historical knowledge as part of shaping people's opinions today. I know there's a lot of debate on Section 230, on the power of big tech and messaging on the internet, and what gets shared, what doesn't, how fact checkers became a thing. There's a lot of these kinds of debates out there. But what I do think there is generally is a lack of people that are doing the real research. I'm not talking about regurgitating what you see shared on your friends' timelines. I'm saying people that are really reading, consuming, becoming deeply knowledgeable about history in order to inform decisions on what is happening currently and what those impacts are on our future. So I'll stay away from politicizing it, but I think that's a really smart observation, Pat. And I do hope that everybody out there, soaks that in a little bit. I know I'm going to soak it in, do even more reading in the next year. But I will say, if you're not going to read, you're not going to consume, and you just want to know the most important stories in tech, you want to be able to not just hear the news, but know what it means. We hope we'll have you back, because really we do love our community here. We love all of our industry partners. We love all the executives and guests that come on the show, the listeners from outside the industry, the consumers, the users, the people that like tracking tech, the people that like to heckle us. I mean, I have no doubt that my opinions have drawn ire across the year. I've got some very, very interesting fan mail. By the way, if you email me, I consider you a fan. So just remember that. Even if you're emailing me to disagree, I consider you a fan. Maybe a crazy fan, but you're a fan. But we really do appreciate all of you out there that have made the 6-5 podcast one of the most popular tech podcasts in the world. You will not be forgotten as we continue to grow and as we continue to share our knowledge with the world.
Daniel, great ending. I can't add a single thing to that other than just to say from myself, I really appreciate all of you tuning in. I do take your criticisms very seriously, even though, I am pretty thin-skinned, but I do listen to them and absorb them and try to make things better. I don't shill, but I sometimes am wrong about things, and I can be educated. I always like to joke. I'm not right about everything, but on the important stuff, I'm more right than I am wrong. So appreciate you hanging in here. Have a great year, and cannot wait to see everybody in 2021.
Happy